Hey guys, Spud here, and welcome to our first DCS F-100D Super Sabre tutorial video. We're going to be taking a look at the cold start, taxi, and takeoff procedures for this awesome Cold War icon. We're also going to fly through a departure procedure here to help make sure we get you guys as comfy with and familiar with the cockpit as possible before it's finally your turn to jump into the Hun. Today's cold start procedure is all by the book, straight from the 1974 copy of the Super Sabre -1 manual. And while the startup may seem long, by using the scramble procedure laid out in the -1, it can be vastly simplified and shortened and more or less gamified. But I figured you guys would want to see the real McCoy to start off with, and it always helps with making sure you're nice and familiar with the cockpit itself. As always guys, keep in mind, everything you're seeing here is a work in progress and is certainly subject to change, and that doubly applies to the cold start procedure of a DCS World module. So let's jump in and get started guys. Alright guys, welcome to the office of the F-100D Super Sabre, as we're sitting on the ramp here at Nellis Air Force Base, Nevada. And we can see there's a few other Huns as well as some F4 bros stacked all around us here. And I'm sure they're going to be heading out to join us on the range in just a little bit here. But since we're the very first jet slated to come out of Nellis this morning, and we've already built our nest and we're nice and comfy in our ejection seat here, we'll jump right into our cold start procedure. After which we'll roll right into the taxi procedure, then the takeoff procedure, and we'll fly through a departure, so that way you guys are nice and comfy and familiar with the cockpit of the F-100 here. So right off the bat, the first thing we're going to check is going to be our oxygen system. And that's because if that doesn't work, then there's no reason to continue the startup. We're going to have to call up ops, they're going to have to send out some maintenance guys, and it's going to be a whole thing. So the control head for the oxygen system is at the forward section of the right-hand console. We'll bring the supply valve to the on position. We'll check that we're in the normal oxygen position and that our blinker is going as we're breathing in and out of our oxygen mask here. We can also check that we've got plenty of locks on board with the oxygen gauge that is just outboard of the control head for the oxygen system. And then we will go through and do a little bit of housekeeping before we apply power to the aircraft. We'll bring the thunderstorm lights to the on position. Those are just some white lights to make things a little bit brighter around the floor of our cockpit here. We've got the instrument lights, both the line lights and the flood lights, in the full bright position, as well as the console lights, just to make sure things are as easy to see as possible for you guys watching the video. And we'll bring our position lights to the on position, as well as our external floodlights and our beacon light as well. And this will ensure that any ground crew who are not associated with our aircraft, like our crew chief, are aware that our aircraft is receiving power and could be ready to start up. So with that complete, we're going to move to the left-hand console now and ensure that we bring our engine master switch to the on position and make sure that it's guarded as well so it's not accidentally bumped in the off position, especially once we're up into the air. That could make for a real bad day. Alright, zooming out here, we're going to just do a little sweep through the cockpit and see if there's any other little ancillary items that we can get to make things a little smoother once we apply our ground power. One thing we can do is in our briefing, we were told that the altimeter setting was 299.5, so we've got that set. And with that, I believe we are good to rock and roll. So, using our hand signals, we'll call up our ground crew, and we'll tell them to connect the ground power to the aircraft. We should start to see our gauges, as well as our caution and advisory stack come to life here.
Ground power is now on.
Along with our internal lighting and our external lighting. Perfect. At this point, we can now bring our ship's battery online. It's a switch that can be a little bit hard to find. It's tucked right up underneath the canopy bow on the right-hand vertical console. Bringing that to the on position here, we're going to check to ensure that there were no fluctuations in any of our electrically powered gauges here or in our caution and advisory stack. We can also see that our gyros are starting to erect both in our HSI as well as our two ADIs here as well. These off flags will automatically come off once our gyros are erect and ready for flight. Next, we'll go ahead and come down to our radio control head here, so that way we can get our startup clearance from either Nellis clearance or Nellis ground, whoever is online at the moment. We'll bring the power knob to the right both position, at which point we can adjust our radio frequencies either manually with these knobs up top here, or we can set the radio to preset frequencies, at which point we can now use this scroll knob to go through one of 20 different preset frequencies. And then of course we can also go to guard if we need to go to guard in some sort of an emergency situation. Just to the left of that, we of course have our volume knob for our main radio as well. Perfect. We have our startup clearance as well as our departure clearance. We're going to be flying the Dream 7 out of Nellis today out to the ranges. Next, we're going to double check that our engine master switch is in the on position, because if we start giving our ground crew our hand signals to let them know that we're going to fire up the aircraft, and we're pressing the button and nothing happens, our ground crew is definitely going to think we're dumb, and we're going to look nice and stupid in front of all of our friends. So we're not going to do that. Next, this is where the startup procedure of the F-100 can be a little bit confusing if you're used to starting up other Huffer-started aircraft such as the F-14, the F-5, or the F-4. Things go in a little bit of a different order here. So we're going to use our hand signals once again and tell the ground crew to connect our air supply.
Connect ground air supply. Copy. Ground air supply is now connected.
And the developers have stated, guys, that there is going to be a Huffer model that will come online with the aircraft in due time here. It's just not quite ready at the moment. So keep that in mind. Next, we're going to come down to our ignition button, which is on that right-hand vertical console and the far right-hand side of the instrument panel. We're going to press and hold the engine starter ignition button for about 2 to 3 seconds, or at least until the button itself lights up red. At which point we're then going to have the ground crew apply the air from the Huffer into our engine. Now, normally you'd be used to applying the air first, then going to the igniters. However, we do it in the reverse order here in the F-100. So we're going to go ahead and press this 1, 2, 3. We're going to tell the ground crew to apply the ground air.
Ground air supply. Copy. Air is now applied.
Looking at our RPM gauge here, once we reach about 12 to 16% RPM on our engines, we're going to bring the throttle to the idle detent and introduce fuel to the engine by pressing the right shift and home key on our keyboard. Alright, that should be good. Right shift and home. And we can see our RPM is now climbing, along with our oil pressure and our exhaust temperature. So we've definitely gotten light off at this point. Our fuel flow is climbing, and we can see our hydraulic system is coming online with the stick moving, and our hydraulic gauge here coming up into the green as well. Your engine will stabilize at roughly 59 to 60% RPM for idle with our engine here in the F-100. And at this point, we can now have the ground crew pull away the ground power and the ground air.
Chief, disconnect ground air supply. Copy. Ground air supply is now disconnected.
Chief, turn off the ground power.
And we're looking to ensure that there are no undue power fluctuations in our gauges, as well as in our caution and advisory stack as well. Perfect. Everything is looking good and we're ready to go. We're going to check to ensure that we've got our allotted amount of fuel in our external tanks, as well as in our internal tanks. And we are going to perform our first electrical check. We're going to come down to our right vertical console again. We're going to bring our battery switch to the off position and ensure that we don't lose electrical power to our aircraft. This is checking to ensure that our engine is in fact powering our main ship's bus. Battery switch back to the on position, and we can see a little power fluctuation in the internal lighting there, but that's nothing to worry about. At this point, we can now set our takeoff trim and perform our hydraulic system tests. Coming over to the left-hand console here, we have our takeoff trim push button. We're going to press and hold that until we get our green trim for takeoff light illuminated, at which point you can press that at any time to double check that you have the correct trim set and ready to go. Now, we're going to keep our eye on our hydraulic pressure gauge, and we're going to test System 1 first with our hydraulic selector knob here. This knob simply just selects which hydraulic system is displayed on the hydraulic pressure gauge here. We're going to take our stick and push it all the way to the forward position. We're going to check and ensure that our hydraulic pressure needle stays in the green. And then our ground crew is going to help us out, but we're checking to ensure we have no aileron deflection. This is ensuring that there's no cross-speed bleed between hydraulic systems, and that the rigging for both the hydraulic systems and the backup cables and pulleys are not misrigged. So we should be good there. We're then going to pull the stick all the way aft and ensure that the needle settles in the green. Once again, checking our ailerons to ensure we don't have any aileron deflection. That would look like this or like this, just so you guys know. So we can see there is no aileron deflection. Perfect. We're going to check hydraulic system 2 at this point. Stick all the way forward. Again, needle settles in the green. Ailerons. Perfect. Stick all the way back. Needle comes down. Settles in the green. Checking. Ailerons, good to go. Hydraulic selector to the utility system, and we will do a rudder check. This one is a little bit harder to see and will definitely require some help from the ground crew, but we'll see if we can kind of crane our necks here a little bit. Rudder, perfect, we can see some deflection there. And we'll do the test again to ensure that she stays in the green. Perfect. And we'll go to the rudder alternate system. This is the backup system in case we're to take battle damage or have some sort of a fault with the aircraft. The needle is going to come down past the yellow arc and settle right about 300 psi. And the manual states that if it's below 500 psi, all you need to do for a good test is to ensure that you have rudder movement. Cool. That looks good. Do another check here. Make sure our needle isn't going down to 0. Awesome. Everything is set and ready to go there. Hydraulic tests are now done, and we have one more electrical test. We're going to bring the brightness up on our gun sight. We're going to bring our gun sight mode select switch to the sight and radar position. We're going to ensure that we can see the pipper dot of our gun sight in our combiner glass here. And we're now going to perform the DC fuel boost pump check. Now, this is going to be a switch that's going to be right back here by your right hand hip here. We're going to press and hold it to the off position. we're going to check to ensure that we can still see our gun sight pipper dot, at which point we can release that test switch, and we know that we have a good DC electrical system boost pump. Alright, continuing here, we can bring our flaps to the intermediate position. That's going to be the middle position. With the way the flap switch is labeled here, it can be a little bit tough to see exactly which position it's in. So if you need to hit it twice and bring them all the way down and then back up to the intermediate position, don't worry, that's not going to hurt your flaps and it's not going to hurt your jet. It's just exercising the flaps a little bit. So with that, we're going to then do a little bit of cleanup throughout the cockpit here and set things up as you need them set up for the mission. We're going to bring our gun sight switch back to the off position, so that way we don't damage the gyros in there if we were to, say, hit some potholes or some bumps or cracks in the concrete as we're taxiing. Come back up here, we'll definitely set our ground control frequency for our taxi clearance. Coming up to our WCRS panel, you may want to preset how you're going to fire your rockets or drop your bombs so that we're not worrying about that as you are flying through enemy territory and dodging flak and SAMs and MiGs. We're then also going to double check that we have our takeoff trim set. Our pitch and yaw dampener is going to come on. The pitch and yaw damper switch was ordered to be in the off position below 500 feet. However, here in DCS, if you're using just some standard flight sim controls and not, say, force feedback controls, things like that, this is going to make your jet so unstable that it's going to make it really hard to take off and land. So I recommend just go ahead and put your pitch yaw damper into the engage position, regardless as to what the manuals actually say. We'll test the actuation of our canopy, and then we'll bring her back up so we don't get too hot in here as we taxi around. We're getting ready to taxi here, so we're going to bring our landing light on to let our ground crew know that we're going to move the jet pretty soon here. Coming through the rest of our cockpit, if there's anything else we need to set up, we will do it now. Everything is looking good. Coming down our right-hand console here, we're going to set our squawk code that we were assigned for today's flight, which is going to be 2077. We're going to bring our IFF switch to the norm position. Now that we have our electrical system set and there's going to be no more power fluctuation, fingers crossed, with our electrical system that could wipe out our mode 1 code or damage our IFF systems. Moving aft here, we're going to set up our navigational aids for flying through the Dream 7 departure for today. So we'll go ahead and open up our knee board here and let's go through that. For the Dream 7, we're going to fly from runway 03 left, coming out tracking the 028 radial from the LSV TACAN station, at which point at 11.5 DME, we're going to intercept the 344 radial out of Boulder City, and then fly that out to Juneau at 17,000 feet or above at a DME of 44. Now, here in the F-100, we only have one TACAN receiver and one HSI, so we're not going to very easily be able to swap back and forth between the Nellis TACAN station and the Boulder City TACAN station. Now, from experience of flying in and out of Nellis here, we know that the runway heading out of runway 03 left is 028. So, by virtue of horseshoes and hand grenades, if we just fly runway heading, we should be close enough to the 028 radial that when we hit that 11.5 DME, we're just going to go ahead and make that left-hand turn to intercept the 344 radial out to Juneau here. So, let's go ahead and set 114 X-ray for Boulder City. Down here on our TACAN receiver, 114 X-ray, transmit, receive, that is set and good to go. Now, we can see here on our HSI as well as our DME here, we do not have line of sight with Boulder City. Boulder City is just over that little mountain ridge over there, so we should get contact with it once we are up and off the ground and ready to actually intercept that 344 radial. So, that's set and ready to rock and roll. Alright, coming through the rest of the cockpit here. Everything is ready to go. All of our tests are good. We have a healthy jet. So with that, we're going to go ahead and pull the safety pins out of our canopy jettison handle here, as well as our ejection seat. Now, when you pull the safety pins out, you want to make sure that you wave them to the ground crew so that way they can see them, so that way they know there is a hot canopy and a hot seat. And then we're going to stow them in our safety pins bag here. And when you come back after your sortie and you're shutting down your jet and you want to replace those safety pins, just click on the bag and boom, those safety pins will be restored. For our taxi procedure, it's very, very simple. We're just going to very gently, and I recommend just going nice and slow for your first couple times taxiing the F-100 here. It can be very embarrassing to get a compressor stall as you are trying to taxi your jet. We're going to do a brake test here. Nose wheel steering on. Do a little bit of a nose wheel steering test here. There we go. Nose wheel steering's good. I was a little bit worried about the brakes and the nose wheel steering there for a second, but it looks like we got the hydraulic pressure back on the nose wheel steering system, so that should be good. It's also important to note here that your nose wheel is directly right underneath your butt here in the F-100, and that will help you stay on center line. And it's also worth noting that you have a heck of a lot of nose out in front of your nose wheel here in the F-100. So if you're in a tight spot, it can be very, very tricky to actually ensure that you're not going to hit something with your nose, surprisingly. Okay, now that we're satisfied with the way our nose wheel steering is working, as well as our brakes, we're going to bring our anti-skid switch to the on position and make sure that that is guarded in the on position. All clear here. Hey, look at that. Looks like there's a couple Marines here as well. Probably visiting from Yuma or El Toro. Kinda cool. And we'll go ahead and make that hard turn here into the EWR. At which point we'll go ahead and stop, we'll hold our brakes, and we'll hold our hands up in the cockpit here as the ground crew runs around and pulls the safety pins from our weapons before we head out to the range here. At which point they'll give me a thumbs up, and they'll do their safety checks on the jet as well. They'll give me another thumbs up, and we should be set and ready to go. So we'll continue our taxi on out to runway 3 left. Alright, at the hold short line when we are next for takeoff, we'll go ahead and close our canopy. I'll make sure that we hold the switch for a few more seconds just to ensure that the canopy seals correctly. We'll do a sweep through our cockpit, flaps, takeoff trim, pitot heat, external lights, taxi light, landing light, all that good stuff. At which point we are ready for our takeoff. Hey guys, post-production Spud here. Another thing we need to do as part of our pre-takeoff checks after we get our canopy closed, we check our takeoff trim, and we get our pitot heat turned on, is we need to ensure that we select our external tanks so that way they feed for us. 99% of the time when you're flying the F-100 in combat, you're going to be feeding off of the intermediate tanks. So we'll go ahead and push up the power. Now, thankfully we got some good weather today. The wind is coming right down the pipe of the runway. And one thing I neglected to set is going to be our course. So we need to set the 344 radial for our course. Of course, I went the long way around. 344, perfect. So typically in the F-100, I would definitely go for a static takeoff because your takeoff runs in this aircraft can be incredibly long, especially if you have quite the heavy loadout. So right now we're carrying a couple rocket pods and a couple of Shrikes, which is not going to be a super heavy loadout, but if you're carrying, say, 8 bombs and external fuel tanks, that's going to be a super heavy loadout, and your takeoff roll is going to be really long, so you don't want to leave any runway behind you, and you don't want to waste any runway during engine spool up. So we'll go ahead and hold our brakes here. We're just going to slowly, gently spool up our engines. Again, rather embarrassing to have a compressor stall while trying to take off. We're going to release our brakes and engage afterburner. As we're rolling down the runway and our rudder becomes effective, once speed comes alive, our nose wheel steering is going to come off, and our rudder should be effective now. And at 140 knots, I'm going to start to gently pull back and rotate off of the runway. I'm just going to hold that nose up there, nice and gentle, and just let the airplane fly off. Gears coming up. Flaps coming up as well. And again, this jet just does not like to come off the runway, and she does not like to fly initially, so keep that afterburner plugged until you get to at least 300 knots of indicated airspeed, and just hold that runway heading to maintain that radial. Coming out of the LSV TACAN station here. Just keep trimming her out a little bit here. Coming up on 300 knots. We'll go ahead and disengage the afterburner. Checking our plate here. And we're starting to get the Boulder City TACAN, no problem. And we're still holding about 028 heading. And you guys can see here, even in full military power, we're just not accelerating at all. And we're starting to get some movement on our CDI needle. There's one dot of deflection. And then do about quarter of a dot, so we'll go ahead and start our turn to 344 degrees. And we'll call that good. That's about 344. And we're right on the CDI needle as well. And that all looks about right. Now, in the F-100, if we got to climb via, our problem here is now going to be 17,000 or above at Juneau at 44 DME. So if at any time you may need to start to get a little bit more burner in there, power to our RHA as well as our gun sight there. And looks like we're holding that 344 radial pretty well. A little bit more nose up trim. and I'm really just pitching to maintain that 300 knots of indicated airspeed, 10 miles and 7,000 feet to go, or about 14 miles, so I think we're going to be okay without using the afterburner. Now that we're up off the ground, we can go ahead and start feeding from our external tanks. That is something that I neglected in the pre-takeoff checks. $35 DME coming through 12,000. Go ahead and hit the burner for just a little bit here. Make sure that we hit 17,000 by Juno. And looks like we're coming a little bit left of course, so we'll correct back to the right-hand side. Coming out of burner here, but it looks like we are gonna make it. We got 4 miles to go and 1,000 feet to go, with a climb right about 5,000 feet per minute, so we should make it no problem. And there's 17, perfect, at 42 DME, so we should be good. Alright, and there's intersection Juno, 44 DME, right there, just a hair to the left of the 344 radial. So we'll go ahead and level off here for a little bit to accelerate in full military power. And guys, that's all she wrote. So for the startup procedure, like I said in the intro, we went for a bit of a more complex, by-the-book startup procedure. But there's a lot of that stuff that you can potentially eliminate for a more of a game-like startup procedure. That should make things a lot faster and a lot quicker, as well as the book does have the ability to show you guys how to do a scramble start, which eliminates a lot of that stuff as well. So, thanks for watching, guys. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope this helps you get nice and familiar with the cockpit of the F-100D Super Sabre. Please leave a like and a subscribe, and we'll see you guys in the next one. Fly safe out there and enjoy this beautiful game.